Striker, who needs a striker when you've got Mikel Merino to come off the bench? Arsenal get the job done come the end of what might have been one of the worst Premier League games I've watched in a decade. We'll discuss Mikel Merino's new role, Ethan Nwaneri's brilliance, the significance of the victory, and more on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. But first, a very quick message from our partners. This video is brought to you by Stocks FC. Stocks FC is the football stock market where you can buy stocks in your favourite players and earn cash rewards based on their real-life performances. To get you started, they're giving away 5 free stocks to every user that signs up this month, offering you the chance to familiarise yourself with the platform. Buy stocks in young players you fancy to prove themselves and watch their stocks rise, or invest in those you see as solid performers who will maintain their value. Earn weekly dividend payments every time your players score goals, make assists and play key passes. Your free loan stocks are eligible for payouts for a month, so why not give it a go? To claim your 5 free loan stocks and begin your journey, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description. I'll be taking you along on my journey throughout our upcoming videos. Join me on the ride, Stocks FC. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope you're all having a wonderful Sunday so far. We're coming to you live bright and early on this Sunday morning with a smile on our faces as we reflect on Arsenal's victory over Leicester City. Now, I know what people are going to do, right? Because there's been a lot of negative feeling around Arsenal recently. There's a lot of questions about the transfer window. I said that we're not going to go on about that again, and we're going to just park that for a minute, right? I don't want to spend the whole show talking about that stuff again. But because of that, of course, there's a real feeling of frustration around the club. And what we got yesterday in terms of the performance was nowhere near it, right? Let's be honest and open and frank about that. But getting a victory was exactly what the doctor ordered. Now, I know what people will do. They'll say it was Leicester, and Leicester are one of the worst teams in the division, and you should absolutely go there and win, and you should absolutely go there and win comfortably. We didn't exactly do it comfortably, but in the end, our quality shone through. And one of the questions that has been on the lips of so many Arsenal fans for a while now is, what happens in the event that Kai Havertz is unavailable following Gabby Jesus' big injury, and then Havertz himself suffers a big injury, and so now the talk around who plays at centre forward has intensified, and rightly so. Did we find a solution yesterday in Mikel Merino? Mikel Arteta was quite clear about the fact that we didn't really train for it. It wasn't really something that was thought to be one of the primary options, but he said that the game needed that the game allowed for that. And Mikel Merino comes off the bench, and that decision from Mikel Arteta paid dividends, didn't it? Now, let me be clear before some people start in the chat, in the live chat. I do not think that this is the solution for every week. I do not look at the situation now and go, don't worry about the fact that we didn't get a striker. Don't worry about the fact that we didn't add to the attack because Mikel Merino is going to fix everything. I don't think that, okay? But he certainly came up trumps yesterday, and it certainly worked in the context of that game. Against better teams, will it work? Maybe not. In different game states, will it work? Maybe not. So I'm not saying that the problem is solved or that the box is ticked, but we've seen that we can be adaptable. We've seen that the team still want it. They're still desperate to achieve what they set out to achieve at the start of the season. Have we had some problems along the way? Absolutely. But I've been saying this over the last few days. Draw a line under the transfer window now and focus on what we have. And what we have is a very committed and a very united group of players. And that can go a long way in football, you know. Will we fall short? Maybe. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens between now and the end of the season. But that was a big victory in the context of our title chase, because to come back after Dubai, having had, 10 days off or whatever it was, there was a pressure on us to deliver, and there was a pressure on us to beat a side that we should be beating, right? There's no getting around that. You know, Leicester City are a really, really poor side. Arsenal are hoping to go on and win the big one. And so anything less than a victory yesterday would not have been good enough. Would not have been good enough. We've managed to get it. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't great in terms of the performance, but we did it. And that is ultimately, I think, when you're going through a difficult period in terms of the circumstances around your team, I think that's what really, really matters. We're going to talk about a few elements. We're going to discuss whether or not Mikel Arteta was right to start with the 11 that he did. We're going to talk about the first 70 or so minutes that were really, really poor. We're going to focus on Myles Lewis-Skelly's clearance, which I think is as big a moment in this match as Mikel Merino's opener. We're going to talk Raheem Sterling. We're going to talk the reshuffle. We're going to discuss Merino's goals, Martin Odegaard as well, and those comparisons being made between Ethan Nwaneri and Leo Messi. There's also something that I was really, really disappointed to see pre-game that I want to get into a little bit later on in the show. So bear with me. We're going to do all of that, of course. But let's start with, was Mikel Arteta right to start with the 11 that he did? Okay, so let's take a look at the 11 that Mikel Arteta went with, because I think there'd been a lot of debate, hadn't there, in the week about, how we kind of make this work and what the best option and solution is, given obviously the problems that we have at the moment, given the issues that we have. And, some people, to be fair, and some of you in this live chat had sort of touted to me Mikel Merino as an option up front from the very beginning. And I've got to say, whilst when we first learned of Kai Havertz's injury, that was something that crossed my mind. I'd be lying if I said that I was for it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I sat on here and I went on other platforms and I said, it just ain't going to work. And that cannot be the way that we choose to move forward. That cannot be the basket that we're putting our eggs in. It just can't be, because Mikel Merino, for me, has struggled to make it as a midfielder at Arsenal. He struggled to have the impact that a lot of people thought he would when he first came in the door. And I also think that a lot of the time we look at midfielders who have this ability to sort of make those ghost runs into the box and get their timing right. And we say, well, if they can do that and they can contribute and chip in with goals, well, why can't they play at centre forward? Playing as a centre forward and playing as a midfielder with the license to morph into a centre forward is two very, very different things. If you're making the run from deep, you've got more chance of getting into those positions undetected. You are not the primary sort of source of attention for the centre half. That you're not the guy that they're mainly focused on. Do they have a plan for when you make those runs? I'm sure they do, particularly in this day and age. But you won't be the first one that their attention is drawn to. So that gives you a bit of an advantage. It's like when we talk about fullbacks. I say it a lot with regards to fullbacks. People were saying put Kieran Tierney on the left wing. A left fullback coming forward as the second man, as the spare man, making an overlap, is obviously going to get more space than the winger, who is the right back's primary concern. And the same works for midfield players when they're making those runs into the penalty area. So the Mikel Merino thing, it worked yesterday. Is it going to work going forward? We'll come on to that in a bit more detail. But I think if you applied the logic from the start and you thought about this in the build-up to the game, Leandro Trossard was the most logical option at striker for us. He was the most logical option. Raheem Sterling, we'll talk about his performance in a bit, but I'm sure you can guess where I'm going with that. He needs to be kept on board. Whether or not you think he's good enough, whether or not you think he can have an impact, we are so short right now that Raheem Sterling needs to be kept on board. And there's something to be said about the hierarchy within a squad. If you've only got 3 fit attackers and you choose to leave one of those out and replace him with someone who isn't an attacker, who is a midfielder by trade, it's not just about what it does to the team and how it goes against the logic that I'm saying that you should apply in these scenarios first and foremost, but it also sends the message to that player that you're not really a part of it. And when we're talking so much about trying to build Raheem Sterling's confidence up to a level where he can contribute and help and support us, that would be the wrong thing to do. It would have been the wrong thing to do from the start. We made the change. It worked. And we'll talk about Raheem Sterling's performance in a little bit. But I think at least for this game, and I don't necessarily believe that this has to be the case moving forward, but at least for this game, it was absolutely right, in my opinion, of Mikel Arteta to start the way he did with Sterling, Trossard and Nwaneri as the attack. We talked quite a bit in the preview show, myself and Mike, about how we tried to support, or how we could try to support whoever it was that played in that false nine role. I think we both believed that it was going to be Leo Trossard, and we like the player, obviously, but I think there are some very clear differences between Leandro Trossard and Kai Havertz, right? First of all, their physical stature is completely different. And so my worry was, with Leo Trossard up front, you don't really have that ability to put crosses into the box, because he's not going to beat two big centre halves in the air. Do you go? Someone said to me on X when I sort of suggested that, well, put in low crosses. Well, then you become really predictable, don't you? Then you become really, really predictable. So you need to have that variation. And one of the ways I thought we would be able to do that is by getting Declan Rice up close to Leandro Trossard wherever possible. Having Leandro Trossard as the false nine drop into those slightly deeper pockets and open the corridors for Declan Rice to make those lung-busting runs that he does in behind. And we saw Arsenal, I think, in the early stages of the game, try to make that happen. Didn't really come off, didn't really work on the day, but it was clear that that was in Mikel Arteta's thinking with regards to how you could support Leandro Trossard. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the starting lineup. I think it was what I expected. It was what I thought was the logical thing to do. Did it work? No. And we had to make changes to kind of change the direction of the game. Look, if we're being honest, the first 70 minutes or so of the game were dreadful. Dull as dishwater. So what kind of was the problem? Well, there was no tempo for starters to our game. There was no zip. There was no urgency. There was no creativity. Generally speaking, Ethan Nwaneri, who we're going to discuss in detail a little bit later on, was the only bright spark. He was literally the only bright spark. He had a couple of moments before we eventually broke the deadlock. One where he hit the top of the crossbar, one where he hit the post. And there was a few really nice touches from Ethan Nwaneri throughout the game. And you could see, I think, he was by far the best player on the pitch across both sides. He was outstanding. He was so, so good yesterday. And that's why those comparisons that, as I say, we're going to discuss a little bit later on, are being made. But, you can't just rely on this young kid, as good as he is. And my word, is he phenomenal. You can't rely on him as your only source of spark, of creativity, of inspiration. You need more than that. You need more than that if you want to compete for a Premier League title. And so, although I'm incredibly happy with the outcome, the overall performance was really, really poor. If we look at some of the match statistics, overall ball possession, Arsenal had 60% of the ball. Our XG was 1.38. In the end, we managed to kind of outperform our XG by scoring 2 goals. If you want to look at it through a different lens, Leicester's XG was 0.22, which means we reduced them to very, very little as an attacking threat. So we did our job at that end of the pitch. They had 1 big chance. We had 3, converted 2 of them. Total shots, 11. 6 for Leicester. David Raya made 2 saves. Hermansen in the Leicester goal made 3. We managed 7 corners, 491 passes, 15 tackles to their 23. And then here's a look at where some of our shots were coming from. And, you can see from here, these are the 2 goals highlighted here, the 2 Mikel Merino goals. One ghosting in at the far post, and one sort of in that space between the penalty spot and the 6-yard box where he won the header to ultimately put us in front and set us on our way to winning the game. But yeah, look, the overall performance was really, really poor. Let's not pretend that it wasn't. I don't understand why people want to pretend that it wasn't. The outcome was good and the outcome was great, but there's certainly a lot to work on. And it's going to be like this for a while, you feel. Right? It's going to be painful for a bit. We are in a really difficult moment with a lot of players missing, and we are having to adapt on the fly. You saw that yesterday. We had to bring on a central midfield player and stick him up front because we weren't getting the performance and the tune that we needed out of our front 3. So I think as an Arsenal fan now, we've all had our moans about what's gone on before. We've all had our complaints about the transfer window and how we left ourselves short, etc., etc. Some would argue that we pushed the players too hard, and that's why some of them are out injured for as long as they are, and all the rest of it. We've had all of those conversations 1,000,001 times. I don't want to keep revisiting them. What we have to accept, though, as Arsenal fans, is the reality of our situation. And the reality is that we're going to have to be adaptable, that we're going to have to lean on that defensive strength that we have to keep us in games, even when we don't necessarily have the killer instinct at the other end to put games to bed. So leaning on what we can do very well is really, really important at this stage. And we're going to have to be adaptable. That's the key word. Arsenal need to be adaptable during this period where we're going to be without some key players. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. I do want to move on to that Myles Lewis-Skelly clearance, because I thought that was as big a moment in the game as the goal that Mikel Merino scored to break the deadlock. Let's have a look at it now. So Myles Lewis-Skelly has had all sorts of plaudits recently, and rightly so, because he's been sensational. He's been fantastic. He's been really, really good. He's been really impactful. He's defended great, but he's also carried the ball into midfield really well. He's shown a level of housery that I think stands him in really good stead, and says a lot about where he's at mentally and how mature he is. And, you know, some people don't like that stuff and they're quite critical of it. I think if you recognize at the tender age of 18 that you need a bit of that to survive at the very top level, or you figured out that that's something that if you tap into, it can sort of optimize your performance. I'm a person that's a bit like that. Like, I'm not as good as Myles Lewis-Skelly, but when something annoys me, or like I need to sometimes, to get my maximum, I need to tap into a little bit of frustration. It fuels me rather than gets me down. Like, for example, sometimes I get comments in the live chat where people are going after me. Do you know what it does? It makes me want to go back harder with my argument. It makes me want to think about how I can make my point even better. And I enjoy that side of it. That little bit of edge is really, really important to a lot of people. And it's clear that that's the case with Myles Lewis-Skelly. And obviously, he makes yet another massive contribution yesterday. This is the situation that sort of unfolded and developed, and the ball was given away really poorly in the midfield, and there wasn't anywhere near enough done, in my opinion, to kind of try and mitigate the risk that presented. We were caught out down the left-hand side, and in the lead up to this, you can see Myles Lewis-Skelly's here at the far post, right? He's fully aware of where Bobby the Cordova-Reid is. And that's the most impressive thing about this. It's not just being able to get back and into the position and then executing putting the ball around the post, which is a really technically quite difficult thing to do when you think about the circumstances and the pressure that he's under, etc., etc. It's the awareness, man, the awareness at that age to know exactly where he is. And I can't play you the clip because of copyright reasons, but if you take it back just a couple of seconds, you'll see Myles Lewis-Skelly have 2 or 3 glances over his right shoulder just to make sure that he's fully aware of where Bobby the Cordova-Reid is. And as this situation develops, now I'm going to take it on just a little bit and I'll show you another screenshot.
And Ndidi.
Hold on a second. I'm showing you the wrong clip. I'm showing you the wrong clip. One second. Where's the one that I want?
That was 4 clean sheet all season. Leicester kept 1 clean sheet all season.
Well, that was another example where he's really, really good defensively. But bear with me just a second. I'm just forwarding this video so I can show you the clip I want. Do you know what confused me? When I was at Leicester, I was watching the game from the press box and I was looking at it. In the second half, Arsenal were attacking from right to left, but obviously the TV cameras are on the other side.
Odegaard does well to come to an offside position.
And I thought that was
he waits for the opportune moment to pick out one area, not far away.
Opportunity. Here it is now. So this is where Partey gives the ball away. My apologies. Let me show you this now, and let's be clear that we're looking at the right thing. This is where Partey gives the ball away. This is terrible. This is really, really poor from Thomas Partey. He gives the ball away loosely in midfield. He's got no awareness really of where Jurriën Timber is. And for me, Thomas Partey doesn't do anywhere near enough to get back and to cause Jordan Ayew a problem and to give him something to think about. Ayew's got the freedom of the pitch. And again, the situation is pretty much identical in that Myles Lewis-Skelly has got Bobby the Cordova-Reid over his shoulder. And again, I can't show you the clip for obvious reasons, but he has a couple of glances over his shoulder. He's well aware of Bobby the Cordova-Reid's position. Has Partey done enough to close Ayew down? I'm going to keep going back to this because I just think that if you give the ball away like that, as casually as that, then you have to really put it in to try and win it back. And this is where I worry about Thomas Partey sometimes. You know, I know a lot of people would argue that he's had a good season. And generally speaking, I think he has. But there are just some games where he's a little bit too casual and he doesn't seem to have that physical power anymore to be able to get back. Now, I'm going to digress just ever so slightly now for a second. I'll leave that on the screen so you can see how the situation developed. But just looking at Thomas Partey's, statistics for the game, he played 75 minutes. He had 68 touches, accurate passes, 88%, 49 out of 56. That is not good enough. That is not good enough for someone that's playing at the base of your midfield. That's a position from which you can't give the ball away much. So 49 out of 56, it doesn't sound like the end of the world, but the passes that you're giving away because of your position have the potential to really put your team on the back foot. And especially in this instance, where if you go back, you'll see that Timber's gone on his bike and he's making that run down the right-hand side. And then Partey plays the ball behind him. If you play that pass, if you try and play a forward pass, but the cover's behind you, then the potential consequences of you giving the ball away are far less. But Partey's taking big risks at the minute and getting them wrong. At least that was the case yesterday. In terms of key passes yesterday, he played none. No dribble attempts. He won 5 of his 7 ground duels, which I guess isn't bad. But he lost possession on 7 occasions. And so you can understand why people were getting a little bit frustrated with his performance yesterday. It wasn't vintage Thomas Partey, and physically he didn't look up to it to me. And that's worrying when he's just had 10 days off over in Dubai, isn't it? So I take this clip forward, and Ayew puts the low cross in. And then this is the situation that Myles Lewis-Skelly finds himself in here. Have a look at this. Okay. He's a little bit off balance. Okay. He's on the stretch. He knows that Bobby the Cordova Reed is breathing down his neck. And then I think as a player, and this all happens really, really quickly, you have got to judge, right? You have got to judge what you do here. He's a left-footed player. So the ball's coming to his weaker right foot. Do you try with your right foot and sweep this away from your penalty area and risk slicing it because it's your weak foot? Do you risk taking a touch? Or do you try and put the ball wide of the post? Now, the problem here is that as you approach the ball, you can't possibly know exactly how close Bobby the Cordova Reed is to you. And so actually, in order to take the decision that he did, where he sort of helped it wide of that far post, that shows incredible belief in his awareness of where Bobby the Cordova Reed is. His foot looks like it gets stuck. He's off balance, yet he still manages to produce the kind of clearance that we needed in that situation. Just have a look at it now. Look, I don't want to take anything away from the young lad because I think that would be unfair to do. But I do think there's a little bit of luck here. Now, people are going to say, no, it's not. Don't take anything away from him. He's great. But to me, he looks off balance. To me, he looks like he hasn't quite made his mind up what he wants to do. And in the end, he just knows he needs to get something on it. And thankfully for him, the ball goes wide. That's going to be an unpopular opinion. But I think there's an element of fortune there. But listen, you make your own luck. Because if you're in the right positions, if you're intending to do the right things, then you will get that rub of the green at times. And I think Bobby the Cordova Reed maybe needed to gamble a little bit earlier in terms of getting closer or in behind Myles Lewis-Skelly. I think he's trying to stay on side. He's not quite sure of the timing of Ayew's cross. But I would want my forward player to be a little bit more aggressive and to be breathing down the defender's neck just that little bit earlier. Because Myles Lewis-Skelly's got that little bit of time, he's able to make good of it in the end. I think this is spot on from Amberley. It's a combination of luck and persistence. If he didn't keep trying, he wouldn't be in the right place to get the luck. Absolutely agree. There is an element of fortune about this because it's not a clean clearance. Like, it's not like he shapes his body ready for it and then he just swipes it away with his weaker right foot, the outside of it, to send it wide. You can see that he's off balance. You can see that his foot's kind of got a little bit stuck, which is why I think the luck element comes in here a little bit. But fair play to him. Fair play to him because it's a really big moment in the context of the game. In fact, it's a huge moment in the context of the game. I think it's fair to say that Raheem Sterling didn't exactly sort of win over any new fans after yesterday's performance. I just thought he was really, really poor in so many ways. Let's have a look at some of Raheem Sterling's metrics then. Bear with me a second. Let me just bring this up. Here we go. Raheem Sterling. So first of all, this is a look at his heat map. What am I doing? I'm clicking all the wrong buttons. There you go. So he was playing on the left-hand side. He did drift inside on occasion, but, he tended to play the majority of his football in that half space in from the left-hand side. I just wonder if he might have had a little bit more joy if he sort of pulled out wider at times. If he got the ball sort of on the touchline and dragged out one player, because two players don't really want to come out of the defense and close you down when you're on that touchline. I just wonder if he might have had a little bit more luck in terms of beating that first man. But obviously, Raheem Sterling's instinct, being a right-footed player, playing from the left-hand side, is to go in field. I just felt that his starting position at times could have been a little bit wider, and that might have helped. But look, minutes played 69, expected goals 0.002, expected assists 0.006, no shots on target, no shots off target, one shot blocked, 2 dribble attempts, none of which were successful, 36 touches, 79% pass accuracy rate, 1 key pass, 1 cross, didn't win any of his ground duels, won the only aerial duel that he had in fairness, but lost possession 13 times. Now, what I will say here is, when it comes to losing possession, I've got a much higher threshold for what I allow in terms of the number of times that you lose possession if you're playing as a winger, expected to take on someone and beat someone and produce that moment of magic, than I do if you're Thomas Partey. Okay, so Thomas Partey, seven occasions on which he lost possession. That is a lot worse than losing it 13 times, even though it's nearly double the number when you're playing as a winger, because you can lose the ball in that area. You can afford to. You've got that extra license to take risks because your primary objective is to create a spark and create a moment. So it's very, very different. I know people might look at that and go, well, that's nearly double the number that Thomas Partey did. And we're talking about how bad a game Thomas Partey had. So Raheem Sterling must have had a real stinker. I think he had a poor game. No shying away from that. There's no getting away from that. But to lose possession 13 times as a winger, it's not good enough, but it isn't as bad as the 7 when you're playing as a 6, is the point that I'm trying to make here. I don't know why on earth my page has just updated and got rid of the stats that I was showing you. But hey, let's go back onto that page with Raheem Sterling. So those were his statistics on the day. The offsides was a massive frustration, I know, for a lot that were in attendance yesterday, including myself. I'm actually surprised, looking at the statistics, that it's only 2. I know there were a few occasions in the first half where we got caught offside. I know a few of them were down to Leandro Trossard as well. But the Raheem Sterling ones, they were just really, really frustrating. And I'll tell you why they're frustrating. Because A, when you're the wide man, you've got the benefit of looking across the line. So there's less of an excuse for it. But B, it was like he was getting caught offside out of this desperation to try and earn himself that yard advantage, when actually Raheem Sterling should back himself to, even when timing is run correctly, be able to beat people. Like the Raheem Sterling I remember would have backed himself, backed his pace, backed his sharpness. And it looks like at a time where the player is quite clearly shot of confidence, he's struggling to sort of back himself. And that can lead to a tendency to go a little bit earlier. And when you go a little bit earlier, obviously you run the risk of getting caught offside. Raheem Sterling ain't that old, And I know that, one of the things that was said about him when we signed him was, he's over the hill, he's past it. What are we doing here? And my response was 31. It's not that old. He's certainly not at an age where you should be writing him off. But then I got thinking just recently about, how young Raheem Sterling was when he made his debut. And if you think about how much football he's played then over the course of those years, it's kind of understandable that he is kind of where he's at in terms of, his level just declining and waning a little bit. And I think this is something that we've seen quite a bit over the years. Raheem Sterling is 30. Apologies, I've got that wrong. He's 30, so he's not even as old as I'm saying he is. But even at 30, okay, even at 30, if you've been playing since you were 17 relentlessly, that is going to catch up with you. And he's not the only player we've seen this with. And this is why it's so incredibly important that we look after the likes of Ethan Nwaneri, for instance, and Bukayo Saka, because I've seen many players over the years get to sort of 30 and look completely burnt out and shot. And that shouldn't happen. But it does happen as a consequence of them starting their careers really, really early. And playing a lot of football over a long period of time. Wayne Rooney's probably the best example I can think of. Wayne Rooney looked finished at 30, 31. And when you think about how good a player he was growing up, that's crazy, right? But because he started a lot younger, like, your body can only take so much. And I do sadly believe that is the case now with Raheem Sterling, where, he's over the hill. It's not necessarily an age thing, but it's a burnout thing. And I don't know that he can cope with the rigors of top level football. And when I say top level football, I don't mean Premier League. He can play in the Premier League. He's absolutely good enough for that. I just don't think he's good enough to play at an elite Premier League side anymore. I think we're at the point where you need to really sort of start to think about that. And I think based on the evidence we're seeing, I don't really know how he can start the next game. I just don't know how that can really work, to be honest with you. I do want to talk a little bit about the reshuffle that I think led to us going on and winning the game. Outside of the obvious one, Mikel Merino coming off the bench, I thought the reshuffle was really, really helpful. Let's talk about that next. Okay, so Mikel Arteta made 4 substitutions in total on the day. The first one, of course, saw Mikel Merino come on. He replaced Raheem Sterling on 69 minutes. And just going back to that Sterling conversation very, very briefly, there were some ironic cheers coming from the away end when he was taken off. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that stuff, particularly when it's your own player. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it does anything positive for Raheem Sterling. But at the same time, when you watch that performance and you see how bad it was, you can understand and you can accept why, people feel that way and why that frustration is there and it exists. So I don't condone it. I don't agree with it, but I understand it, is what I would say. But there were 2 other changes that Mikel Arteta made prior to bringing on Kieran Tierney right at the death that I think made a lot of difference. Jorginho came on to replace Thomas Partey on 75, and Ricardo Calafiori at the same time came on to replace Myles Lewis-Skelly. Now, Thomas Partey, I don't think had a very good game. And we've already talked about and looked at that instance where he gave the ball away and it very, very nearly resulted in a Leicester City goal, which I think would have taken any possibility of us winning that game away completely. So that was a massive moment. Thomas Partey was responsible for losing the ball, and I don't think did anywhere near enough to try and get back and resolve the situation. Myles Lewis-Skelly got him out of a hole, and he owes Myles Lewis-Skelly a dinner or something, that's for sure. Jorginho comes on, and Jorginho showed what Jorginho shows, which is that sometimes when a game is stretched and sometimes when a game is really, really open, and that's what the game became in the latter stages, that it can pass him by a little bit, because I don't think he's the best at getting across the ground. I think technically he's a superb player, and so he brings a bit of calm in that sense. And I did see him get on the ball in the last 15 minutes on a few occasions and just slow down the tempo, particularly after we'd taken the lead. And that was exactly what the doctor ordered. Ricardo Calafiori coming on as well, I think, was a positive change. Now, again, this is not to criticize Myles Lewis-Skelly, who we've been waxing lyrical about already on this episode. But I just think Ricardo Calafiori is that little bit more forceful. He's that little bit more aggressive in the way that he steps out from left back and goes and attacks and goes into midfield. Lewis-Skelly has got a real good defensive awareness about him. And if I had to be critical of Calafiori, I'd say that for someone who's a centre-back by trade, actually sometimes he almost just abandons what his defensive responsibility is. And I do think that can cost you at times. But in this case, where we just needed a bit more aggression, someone a bit more forceful, I think Ricardo Calafiori gave us that. And so I think the Jorginho and Calafiori substitutions made subtle differences, but differences that certainly aided us in going on and winning the game. So that's kind of how I saw those 2. The obvious one is the Mikel Merino one. That change obviously proved to be a match-winning change. And yeah, it's so it's so great to see us be able to bring someone off the bench that can have an impact like that, right? In whatever position. Just on that reshuffle, just finally before we move on from that, I also thought that taking Sterling off and putting Trossard back on the left got Trossard going again, right? Because it wasn't just Raheem Sterling that was struggling on that left-hand side. I know he's been made the scapegoat, and I definitely agree with those who say that his performance was nowhere near good enough. But Leandro Trossard was really struggling as the 9 yesterday. It just didn't work. There might be other games where it works. There might be other contexts where it works, but it didn't yesterday. And so getting Leandro Trossard back out to that left-hand side was as impactful because obviously he creates the second goal as the other changes that we made as well. So sometimes a change on the pitch rather than bringing someone from off the pitch can also be significant. And I thought that reshuffle was really, really key. Let's talk Mikel Merino's goals then. We'll move on to those now. So I just want to find the clips of those two goals so that we can look at them and we can analyze them in all their glory. Let's start off with the first one, because what we started to do in the second half, is this the first goal? Let me just take it a bit forward so I can make sure that it is. No, this is not. This is the Nwaneri off the post effort. But this was something that became more and more common as the game went on, because we saw it in the build up to the goal as well. But let me just show you here. Arsenal were just that little bit more aggressive in terms of wanting to break the lines a little bit earlier. So you can see it here. Odegaard plays a ball forward. I'll just share this screen with you now. Hold on a second. For those of you watching, don't worry if you're listening on audio. I'll explain it as best as I possibly can. So Odegaard hooks a ball forward. And when he does that, Mikel Merino drops that little bit deeper than everybody else. And he just gets his foot on the ball and he just cushions it into the path of Declan Rice. Now, once that ball has gone long, so it's gone from Martin Odegaard in the sort of left back position. We've taken a throw in and he's just hooked the ball forward. Merino's come deep. You can see that he's dragged Wout Faes, the centre back, with him. Okay, he's dragged him into a deeper position, meaning that now it's Okoli and Christensen, the only two defenders back for Leicester City, which means they're stretched. And that bit of direct play from Martin Odegaard, rather than taking the ball down, taking a couple of touches and sort of allowing Leicester to get into shape and into position, it ends up taking out one. Let me highlight my mouse on the screen so you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Leicester City players. And Merino's move infield and deeper has brought Wout Faes with him. So essentially what we've done is we've taken 6 Leicester City players out of the game. And that creates some space for us. And that space wasn't there in the earlier stages of the game. So that's where we kind of improved in the second half. In the end, the ball is worked from Merino into Rice, who carries it a fair few yards. And then what does Declan Rice do? He plays it into the path of Ethan Nwaneri, who then in a 1v1 situation, you back to make something happen, right? Leicester managed to get a second body back to try and cause Ethan Nwaneri some problems, but they couldn't deal with him. They couldn't stop him. He cuts inside and he has an effort at goal. And that's what can happen if you are a little bit more direct and if you're a little bit more forward thinking earlier. You can bypass players, because Leicester City, I think, after that opportunity that they had, after that clearance that Myles Lewis-Skelly made, they got into a place, they got into a headspace, I believe, where they were starting to feel like they could go on and win the game. They'd been quite reserved up until that point. They were picking their moments, but they seemed to, as Neil says, and this is nail on the head, I think. He says, I would say Leicester grew in confidence, which led to their downfall. Exactly that. They started to press a little bit higher. They started to believe that there was points in it for them, more than just the one that a draw would have brought. And we seemed to cotton on to that. We showed a bit of game intelligence, and we then was able to start being that little bit more aggressive, start breaking the lines earlier, going over the top, going a bit more direct. We couldn't go over the top when Leandro Trossard was our 9, but we could go over the top when Mikel Merino was, because he had that physical presence to make a difference. And when we're talking about 9s, we often obsess about what they do inside the box. In our system, in this team, if you've got players that are willing to run beyond, like Nwaneri, like Trossard when he's playing on the left, like Declan Rice from midfield, which we've been banging on about for the last few days as a way of us coping with the issues that we have, then that 9 dropping deep can be helpful. It can open doors. It can create spaces. Kai Havertz is incredibly good at doing that. And that's one of the things that we're going to miss. So it's important that whoever plays there can do that. Merino can do that because he's a midfielder by instinct. He's a midfielder by trade. And that really, really helps. So Ethan Nwaneri goes on and obviously has the shot at goal. This is the one where he just steps inside. No, this is the one where he goes on the outside of Christiansen in the end, and he hits, of course, the woodwork. So again, do it early, move us quickly, move us forward through the gears, through the lines as quickly as possible. Then the goal comes about. Now, have a look at this, right? This is in the lead up to the goal, okay? So Jurriën Timber has got Ethan Nwaneri to his right. Ethan Nwaneri's come short. He hasn't pulled out particularly wide. He's just inside the penalty area, and he's looking to make something happen. I think he's full of confidence, actually, at this stage because of the fact that he's had 2 efforts that have gone really, really close. And I think he believes now that if he gets that moment, if he gets that opportunity, if he can create that half a yard, he's going to get a shot off. That might have been what Ethan Nwaneri did earlier on in this game. But at this point, when Ethan Nwaneri receives the ball, and I will just take it to there, okay? He puts his foot on the ball here. He now knows that Mikel Merino is in the box. He now knows that Arsenal have an aerial threat that didn't exist in the earlier stages of the game, that didn't exist when he was sort of coming down that right-hand side over and over again for Arsenal as the sort of game developed across the first 70 minutes. But now his mindset has changed. And this is where Ethan Nwaneri shows his in-game intelligence. At 17 years old, to recognize that there is now a different option, there is a different solution available to you, rather than just doing what you've been doing over the course of the last 70 minutes. And put your foot on your ball. Put your foot on the ball, I should say, and sort of assessing the situation, realizing that Merino has positioned himself in that position that he so often likes to take up from midfield, which is in between the centre half and the fullback, and then looking at hitting him. That's maturity personified for me, because it shows us that he recognizes how the game has changed. It's very easy as a young player, I think, to get caught up in the sort of the emotion of it all, and to get caught up doing what you've been doing. Because Ethan Nwaneri knows he's had a good game. You know when you're playing football if you've had a good game or not. You know it. And it could be quite easy, actually, to just be sucked into thinking, I'll just keep doing the same thing over and over again because it's working, and at some point I'm going to get my reward for it. But no, not this time. He puts his foot on the ball. He looks up. He recognizes that Merino has picked up that position, the position that we all want him to be in. And Merino makes a move off the fullback. The cross is perfect. Wout Faes is beaten. All ends up. He's beaten by the cross, the quality of Ethan Nwaneri's cross. And Mikel Merino, who gets up nice and early, is there and on hand to head the ball into the back of the net. Look how early he gets up in comparison to the defenders. You can see that very, very clearly here because he's already in the air, both feet off the ground. Wout Faes hasn't even got off the ground, and neither is the fullback. And then it's a really, really smart header in the end from Mikel Merino, because I think a lot of people and a lot of goalkeepers expect you to go back where the cross has come from, and he doesn't do that. He heads it into the near post. He's obviously very, very comfortable in his heading ability and believes that he can do what he wants. That shows confidence is the point I'm trying to make, because I think generally what people do is they tend to go back across the goal. So shows a lot of confidence in Mikel Merino in that final third, and that's what you want to see from someone that you're asking to play at centre forward. If we take it on to the last goal, and apologies that the video wasn't muted there, just had that feedback in the live chat. That's what the live chat's here for, as well as you asking amazing questions to tell me when I make technical errors, basically. So thank you for that. Let's just move it on then to the third goal, and we'll discuss that one a little bit as well. So again, it comes from Arsenal breaking lines. Now, obviously, at this point, it's a little bit different, right? Because Leicester City have to come and commit people. Leicester City have to go and try and find an equaliser. When I talked, though, about what Calafiori brings, that Myles Lewis-Skelly can bring and has brought in previous games, but maybe didn't bring as much of yesterday. And that could be to do with the game state, was that aggression and that forward thinking and that willingness to just see a space and carry the ball into it. Ricardo Calafiori's confidence in that department is so high that at times it gets him into trouble. But here it was kind of perfect. Look at him charging through the middle. He's broken the line of 3 Leicester City players. You've got an option to the left in Leandro Trossard, who at this point, as I freeze framed it, is slightly offside. You've got the option of Merino to the right as well. But that causes a nightmare for the 3 defenders. Wout Faes is in the middle of the Leicester back 3 at this stage. Akoli has to be aware of Leandro Trossard's position. He wants to probably try and close that ball off in between him and the centre-back as well. And then you've got, on the near side, a defender who's obviously worried about Mikel Merino's run as well. So just committing people and running at people and pulling them out of position is massive. And I don't think Arsenal did enough of this in the early stages of the game. Granted, the game state changes, and that creates more spaces. People get tired. It becomes more stretched, etc., etc. But I thought this was a real good example of what Ricardo Calafiori can bring that Lewis-Skelly can, but probably didn't really bring enough of, I didn't think, on the day. And then what I love about this from Trossard, right? Because it's Trossard's cross into the box that finds Mikel Merino. What I love about this cross is how early he hits it, because there'll be a lot of players that don't feel that they've sufficiently beaten the defender enough to create enough of a space to comfortably get that crossover. And Leandro Trossard just thinks, no, do you know what? I'm going to use my weaker left foot and I'm going to whip this around you, because that means I get to get the cross in early. That means I catch out those in the middle. And that means Mikel Merino gets a head start. And that's a brilliant piece of technical ability from Leandro Trossard, but great thinking as well. Merino's always alert. Merino isn't a centre forward, but he's got, as Mikel Arteta said post-game, that ability to time his runs really, really well. And he does exactly that. He ghosts in at the far post and he finishes. Now, I'm not wanting to dig out Kai Havertz here, right? Because I don't think that's fair. And particularly given how much I've sort of defended him in recent times. But do you believe, and this is an honest question that I want you guys to answer in the chat, do you believe that as good as Kai Havertz is in so many ways, right? Do you believe that Kai Havertz finishes those 2 chances? I think he finishes the first one. I think he has the technical ability to finish the second one. And he might finish it if he just scored a few minutes before, because confidence levels are really, really high. But with Mikel Merino, I just never felt in doubt. Like the minute I saw that cross leave Leandro Trossard's left boot, and I spotted that Mikel Merino was in that position, I knew it was a goal. I knew it was a goal, because throughout his career, Mikel Merino has been able to ghost into those areas and finish really, really well. Now, again, I'm not slagging off Kai Havertz, but I think with Kai Havertz, you do get your ups and downs in terms of his finishing. I just think those 2 chances were taken so well by Mikel Merino that it's fair to start to think, would he have converted those, Kai Havertz? He might have done. He's good enough to. But sometimes his confidence is off. Sometimes he overthinks it, and sometimes it doesn't quite work out for him. But Mikel Merino really, really clinical in that final third when we needed him to be, which I thought was great and fantastic to see. Let's talk a little bit about Martin Odegaard's performance. I'd quite like to get into that, because at half time I was looking at him and I was really, really disappointed by what I'd seen. Like really disappointed. To the point where I was starting to question, whether or not he should stay on the pitch and whether or not we had to go with Merino in that area so that we could throw the ball into the box a little bit more and get him up alongside Leandro Trossard. That was kind of my thinking at half time. It was not hook him off. He's been rubbish. He was bad, but most of them were. But as the game went on, I thought he really, really dramatically improved. And let's have a look at some of his stats and some of the facts around his game to try and establish just how much his game improved and what it looks like in the end when you zoom out and kind of look at the bigger picture. So in terms of his performance, heat map, pretty busy all over the pitch. That's what you expect from Martin Odegaard. Brings incredible intensity, drive, and interesting as well that SofaScore have given Martin Odegaard a 7.8 in terms of his performance rating. I might give him a 7.8 based on the second half, but in terms of the overall game, not for me. Minutes played, 90, of course. Expected goals, 0.05, which is basically nothing. Expected assists, just under 1. 84 touches of the ball, 90% pass accuracy. 63 out of his 70 passes were accurate. 2 key passes, 1 cross, 4 long balls, 4 of which were accurate. 1 big chance created, 1 shot blocked, 3 dribble attempts, 2 of which were successful. Only won 2 of his 7 ground duels, though. Didn't win the 1 aerial duel he was involved in, and lost possession 14 times. Again, I know there's a lot of Thomas Partey defenders in the chat, because I get this quite a bit whenever I dare to question his performances. There will be people that will say, well, you've gone after Thomas Partey's performance and said it wasn't good enough and unacceptable, etc., etc. He gave the ball away 7 times. Martin Odegaard and Raheem Sterling both gave it away pretty much double the number of times. They are tasked with something different. They are tasked with unlocking a defense, which means you have to take risks, which means you are more likely to lose the ball. I don't mind Martin Odegaard losing the ball 14 times if he creates chances. Now, did he create enough big chances to justify that on the day, just the 1? So no. And that's why I was a little bit surprised by how highly he was rated on SofaScore, 7.8 in terms of his statistical rating. I think he was much better in the second half, and I highlighted his role in the first sort of moment that we really kind of broke through the lines against Leicester when Nwaneri ended up hitting the post. That was the first moment where I thought, see what happens when Odegaard just gets on the ball and moves it forward quickly instead of spinning around and going around in circles, etc., etc. So, yeah, much improved second half from Martin Odegaard. He was much more like the player we've become accustomed to watching over the years, but still a lot of room for improvement, I would say. As well. If we take it on to Ethan Nwaneri, then I want to talk about Ethan Nwaneri. And once we do that, we are going to go hard into your questions in the live chat, guys. So start getting them in, put a queue at the beginning of them, and I'll pick out as many of those as I possibly can in the allotted time. Just giving you a little bit of a warning on that so you can start thinking about what you want to ask, what you want to chuck in the chat. We'll get to that in a minute, but not before we've waxed lyrical over Ethan Nwaneri, whose SofaScore rating was 9 out of 10. If he'd have got a goal, it probably would have been 10. He was that good. He was that clearing away, I think, of everybody else on the football pitch yesterday. He was, of course, compared post-match to Lionel Messi. And I don't want to do that, okay? I don't want to do that. I don't want to put that pressure on the young lad. And I also think it's disrespectful to Lionel Messi to compare anyone to him, because I think he's that bloody good and was that great. Easily, hands down, the greatest player of my time. I'm a massive fan of Diego Maradona's as well, based on what I've seen, but he was before my time. Lionel Messi is the GOAT for me in terms of my time. So to compare anyone to him at first sounds wild, but the reason this comparison makes a bit of sense, and again, I'm not saying he's as good as him, so please don't take it that way. The reason this comparison makes a bit of sense is because of the low center of gravity, because of the wand of a left foot, because of the variety of things that he's willing to do. Pick out passes, play crosses, get shots off from all sorts of distances. He's so confident and so, in control of every situation. And at 17 years old, that is bloody scary. So I can understand the comparison, but I think it's a little bit premature at this stage. But what I will say about Ethan Nwaneri before we analyze his statistical performance yesterday is this. A few weeks ago, I was thinking, is this young lad capable of shouldering the responsibility of being our Bukayo Saka replacement for as long as it takes for the England international to get back fit and available again? And very, very quickly, in the space of a few weeks, my mindset on that has completely flipped and changed. Now I look at Ethan Nwaneri and I think, how do I get him and Bukayo Saka in the same team? And right now, I don't know what the answer is, because I think that it's clear to me that Ethan Nwaneri thrives when playing from the right. Obviously, Bukayo Saka does too. And there is an idea that has been floated around that you could play one of them on the left, but then being left-footed players, you take away their ability to kind of cut in on the inside and do damage, which they're both really, really good at. But my mindset has moved on from, is this young 17-year-old good enough to shoulder the responsibility of replacing Saka for a while, and sort of carrying that torch for a bit. It's moved on from that very, very quickly to how do we get them both in the same team, which is a testament to how good this young man has been. Compare him to Messi all you like. I'm not going to stop you because I think he is really, really exciting and on his way to becoming a really great player. It does feel a little bit premature, but the similarities in their playing style, I think, are what is prompting these comparisons more so than people believing he's going to score 50, 60 goals a season or anything like that. But let's have a look at some of the statistics then. Played all 90 minutes. Expected goals was 0.18. And he went very close. He hit the woodwork twice. You think about where those shots were from, that's factored into the XG, right? So if his XG is 0.18 and he's hit the woodwork twice, it shows you how good those efforts were based on what was expected to come from them, given the position and the likelihood of those going in. He's got his assist. Expected assist was 0.57. 2 shots on target, 1 shot off target, 1 shot blocked. Dribble attempts, 8. 7 was successful, which is a really, really high rate. Just back on the shots on target thing, I think one of the shots that came off the post, I think the goalkeeper might have got something on that, which is why it counts as a shot on target. But anyway, dribble attempts, 8, 7 of which were successful. 64 touches, 91% passing accuracy. And when you compare that to Raheem Sterling's, who was playing in a similar position and tasked with doing similar things, that says a lot, doesn't it? Key passes 2, 10 crosses, 3 of which found their intended target, 3 long balls, 1 big chance created, won 11 of his 14 ground duels, both of his aerial duels, lost possession on 14 occasions, but look at how highly all the other metrics stack in comparison to the other players on the day. Sterling, who lost the ball 13 times, Odegaard, who lost the ball 14 times. You can account for and allow players to lose possession when they're producing other numbers, because losing possession comes as a consequence of taking risks and gambles. And yeah, I just thought he had a fantastic game. And I don't want to get carried away. I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but this guy really is the next Lionel Messi, isn't he? Let's just say that. Right. Okay. There's one last thing I want to talk about before we do questions. Something that really, really disappointed me yesterday that happened before the game. And even if we had failed to take the 3 points yesterday, this thing that I'm about to discuss would have still been the most disappointing thing of the day. That's how strongly I feel about this. Let's get into it right after this. You might have seen it. In fact, I'm sure you've all seen it. Martin Keown apologizing to Ruud van Nistelrooy. What are you doing? What are you doing? It was heat of the moment stuff at the height of one of the game's greatest ever rivalries. Why are you apologizing? Shenanigans, Martin Keown called it. Shenanigans? Come on, man. That wasn't shenanigans. That was you giving it back to someone that you felt had wronged your team. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that in football. That bit of needle, that bit of aggression. Of course, there's a line. And there is an argument that Martin Keown did just ever so slightly overstep that line. But I don't think it's that big a deal, so much so that you need to apologize on national television. And I actually think Ruud van Nistelrooy played it really, really cool by being like, yeah, it's all right. It happens. Heat of the moment, rivalry, blah, 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 all of that stuff. Ruud van Nistelrooy was loving it. He was loving it that Martin Keown apologized in the way he did. And that's what disappointed me so much about Martin Keown taking that decision to do that. You're the hard man. You're the original, as far as I'm concerned, when I was growing up, you're the original Arsenal hard man. And you've just apologized to Ruud van Nistelrooy, who cheated us that day. And in my opinion, deserved to get maybe not physically assaulted in the way that Martin Keown went after him, but he deserved to get told about himself is how I would put it. And yeah, that was one of the things that I really admired about that Arsenal side, the way that they all kind of rallied together and were all in it to defend one another. That was what I was really sort of proud of at the end of that game, more so than the result. And Martin Keown has just backtracked by apologizing. I mean, he'll say that, I'm a bigger person, blah, blah, blah. It's been a long time. Why keep the grudge, whatever? No, man, just leave it. Just leave it. Like, you listen to Roy Keane and Patrick Vieira speak when they're on the odd show together. And although there's clearly a respect between one another, there is still a little bit of needle between them. You can feel it. You can sense it. Martin Keown has just killed all of that with Ruud van Nistelrooy by saying, I'm sorry for the shenanigans. That was poor. Real big letdown. Real big letdown. Okay, then. Let's get into your questions. Sorry if that clap deafened those of you listening with headphones. Anyway, let's get into some of your questions from the live chat. Get them in, put a Q at the beginning. It makes it much easier for me to pick them out. Let's start with Neil's question. He says, how did you feel Saliba performed? I thought okay. I didn't really pay... I'm not going to say I didn't pay attention to their performances, but I wasn't really struck by any of our centre-back performances because I just felt that this was a really easy game for us defensively. Like, we weren't ever really under any duress. They had a couple of efforts in the first half. I think there was Ndidi's volley that went wide. I think Ndidi had a header as well. Was it wide, the volley, or did it go straight at David Raya? It might have gone straight at David Raya. And then I think there was a header from him that went just wide. I never really felt like we were under any duress from Leicester City at any real point in the game. So I can't sit here and say that William Saliba had a bad game. I don't think it was his best game. There were a couple of moments where I thought he got bumped off the ball. And I think Jamie Vardy's experience showed where he just managed to get his body in the right positions at the right times and make life difficult for William Saliba. So, yeah, I don't think he was bad, but I don't think it was his best game either, if we're being honest. Just very quickly before I move on to the next question, leave a like, guys. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave a like. Those likes really, really do help. And we've got a poll that we're going to reflect on at the end of the show because we've got nearly 250 votes on that poll. If you're in the live chat, it is pinned to the top of the chat. And the question is, would you start Mikel Merino at centre forward versus West Ham next weekend? That is an option available to Mikel Arteta. I'll discuss my take on that when we get to that point in the show. But if you haven't done so already, guys, please leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. There's no reason why we shouldn't get, a couple of hundred likes by the time we end the live stream. There's certainly enough of you watching. And if you're watching us on X, which some 500 or so of you are right now, come over to the Chronicles of a Gooner YouTube channel, subscribe, and turn the notifications on so that you never miss a show. We don't stream every single one to X, so you won't get them all on that platform. Come over to the channel, or you can download the Chronicles of a Gooner on your favorite podcast store as well. Right, let's get back to your questions. CJ Dan, what positions do we need to buy in the summer? Definitely centre forward. I think we need one more winger as well because I can't see Raheem Sterling staying on, but I think we need one regardless of that. Ethan Nwaneri emerging the way he has maybe changes the thinking a little bit in terms of what profile of winger we go for, because for a long time it's been we need another right-sided player. I think Nwaneri maybe solves that problem. In fact, I'm confident he solves that problem. So maybe you're looking at an upgrade on the left now. And I think we're going to need to regenerate the centre midfield as well because we're probably going to lose one of, if not both, of Partey and Jorginho. I also think we need another goalkeeper. So there's quite a bit of heavy lifting to do in the summer. There really, really is. But also, I don't know about you guys, I'm at the point where I think it's time to move on from Tomiyasu as well. So you probably could do with replacing him in the squad. Or is that Myles Lewis-Skelly? Who knows? Who knows? The robot will eat you says, looking at Nwaneri now, surely it was a huge mistake not starting him earlier in the season when Odegaard was out. I don't think it was, because I think part of why you're seeing Nwaneri play the way he is because how well he's been managed over the course of the last few months. I think putting him into Odegaard's position would have brought a lot of pressure on him. And I also think that Nwaneri, at his age, is better suited to coming in off the right. And if he was replacing Odegaard, he wouldn't have done that. Does he have the intelligence to have combined with Bukayo Saka during that period? Yes. And could it have worked? Maybe. But I don't really look back at the way we've managed Ethan Nwaneri with any regret. I think that we've managed him very smartly. And I think a lot of why he's able to perform the way he is now is because we've managed him really, really well. We've managed the expectation around him, which I think is super important as well. And we've got him to a place where he's got a little bit more experience in the cups and with some minutes here and there. And he's got himself to a point now where he really understands what's required of him in these games. Had you have thrown him in and said play 90 minutes every week in the absence of Martin Odegaard and shoulder all of that responsibility, there's a chance. I don't think it would have been the case, but there is a chance that he would have wilted under the pressure. So I think Arsenal have done the right thing in the way that they've managed him. Mackenzie says, do we start Merino against West Ham or bring him on during the second half once we have a few tired legs in the opposition? And that ties in nicely with the poll. So let me share the results of the poll with you. We've had 250 votes. And the question was, would you start Mikel Merino at centre forward versus West Ham next weekend? 79% of you say yes. 21% of you say no. Now, I think I'm at the point where I'm leaning towards yes. But I'm leaning towards yes, more so because I don't think Raheem Sterling deserves to start. Then I think that Mikel Merino can play that role from the beginning of games, week in, week out, and it work really, really well. Do you see where I'm going with this? So there's a part of me that believes that Mikel Merino should start at centre forward because Raheem Sterling doesn't deserve to start after the performance against Leicester. And if we're being completely honest, based on what we've seen of him at Arsenal so far. But there's also a part of me that looks at Merino at centre forward and thinks that is the kind of thing that you turn to in a game, maybe late on when the game's in a certain game state. And it's not something that I believe is completely 100% sustainable. Does that make sense? So starting Merino up front, if you go down that route, there will be games where 60 minutes in, you're looking at it and going, this ain't working. And he wouldn't have got a sniff. When the game was stretched the way it was, when we had to go a little bit more direct the way that we did, when we started to want to put the ball into the penalty area a little bit more out of desperation for what was going to be the winning goal, it suited Merino down to a T. And so I'm kind of on the fence. I think for me, if I'm telling you what I would do, I probably would start Merino because I think Sterling's performance was that disappointing that I don't think you can keep him in the starting 11 and then beat the drum about this being a meritocracy. But at the same time, if I'm trying to predict what I think Mikel Arteta will do, because I go back to a point I made very early on in the show about needing to keep Raheem Sterling on board, if I had to predict, I'd say he's going to go with the same front three, again with a view to using Mikel Merino as that auxiliary forward man, as and when we need. So that's kind of my stance on that. Interested to know sort of why you guys have voted the way that you have. So please do let me know in the chat box. I'd love to hear from you. PTM Production says, Harry, if we had brought a striker in the January window, how many goals do you think he'd have? Not the 2 that Mikel Merino has, I think is the answer that you want me to give you. And it's true. There's no guarantees. We all agreed that we needed someone. We all wanted to see someone come in, but there's no guarantees in football, is there? There's no guarantee that Mikel Merino continues this kind of form either. So that's another thing to be wary of, right? But we just got to see. We just got to see how this goes after the next few months. And as I've said to you already, as I've kind of explained, I think that we are going to have to accept that we're going to be a little bit ugly to watch, that we're not going to be the best team on the eye, that we're going to have to fight through games in different ways, have to be adaptable, have to be able to change things on the fly, have to be able to utilize the strengths of various members in the squad for different purposes. And that's kind of the way that we're going to have to do it between now and the end of the season if we're going to stay in contention. Plan A, with the injuries that we have, has gone out of the window. Plan B has probably gone out of the window too. We're at a point where you're going to have to switch between plan C, D, and E and see which one suits on the day. And this is where Mikel Arteta's in-game management is going to be really, really important. And I do believe that this is something that he's improved on quite a bit, actually, over the last few seasons. That ability to spot a problem on the pitch, to spot a potential area that we can exploit, and then to be able to kind of think clearly in the height of the game with all the emotion going around in your head and in the stadium, to be able to think clearly and come up with what will work, either that be sort of trying to deal with an issue that we have or trying to exploit one that is spotted in the opposition. In-game management is going to be really, really important. And that's one of the things I think that stands Mikel Arteta out from a lot of other coaches. There's a lot of coaches with really strong philosophies. There's a lot of coaches with really, really strong values that make sure that they implement that stuff day in, day out, that make sure that their team, their squad, their group are living and breathing it. But there aren't that many managers that can do that, but also have the in-game intelligence and display the in-game intelligence that Mikel Arteta does, I think, pretty much on a weekly basis now. And, we've all had our moan about the situation recently. I've been very, very careful to protect, in my opinion, or to shield Mikel Arteta from the criticism that I don't believe belongs at his door. If you're talking about, the idea of burning players out, if that's what you think has happened, then fine. I understand why you would associate that with the manager. If you're talking about tactical decisions that you don't necessarily agree with, I know and I understand why you would associate that again with the manager. But when you're talking about transfer activity, you have to accept and understand that it's not just on Mikel Arteta. And that's why I kept calling it a collective failure, because we have got a very, very good manager here. We've got an elite manager here. And whether the Arteta outers and haters want him or not, I can guarantee you that when his time eventually comes to an end at Arsenal, there will be big clubs lining up to get him. Because has he got us over the line yet? No. But he's done enough of a good job to attract the attentions of the world's very best clubs. I can tell you that. That is going to be the case if he becomes available on the market. He will be very sought after for what he's done at Arsenal, even up to now. There's no getting away from that. He spoke brilliantly in the press conference ahead of this game, I thought, in terms of making it clear that we've got the problems that we've got, but we just have to get on with it. And we have to find solutions, and we have to try and find ways around it rather than sitting there moping, complaining. He was very buoyant in that press conference. He would have been really struggling during that first 70 or so minutes of that game, where Arsenal, in my opinion, were really, really poor. But when he talks about the strength and he talks about the spirit that this group has, when he talks about the determination, the desire, and all the rest of it, and the adaptability, you can't really deny that, can you? When you look at how the game ended up, who the winner was, who the hero was for us, how Ethan Nwaneri stepped up and took on the mantle of our most creative player. Like, there is so much in this squad that we do have going for us that, maybe going a little bit doom and gloom was a little bit premature in the last couple of weeks. I understand the frustration, I do, and I'm not saying that the world is fixed because we beat Leicester City away, a team who I fully expect, by the way, to get relegated. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that don't give up on these boys yet, because they haven't given up. And as supporters, by our very definition, our job is to get behind them. Vent your frustrations when you're chatting with your mates. Vent your frustrations when you're down the pub. But putting them online, think about who's going to see them. Think about where they're going. Think about what they breed. And then when it comes to being in the stadium, well, that's a completely different kettle of fish, isn't it? Unconditional love and support is what you need as to give the team during this period of time as supporters in the stadiums right now. That's what I believe. People will disagree. That's what I believe. Matt G says, why do you think Odegaard doesn't shoot as much as people would like him to? Do you think it's an instruction from Arteta? Partly, maybe it's a lack of confidence as well. Because I certainly think Martin Odegaard is experiencing a bit of a lack of confidence at the moment. So I think it's a combination of those things. I think we've got a very clear plan in our minds of how we want to build up in games. And Martin Odegaard plays a big, big role in that. But I also think it's a confidence thing as well. Yeah, I do. I think it's a confidence thing. Lots of questions about the Merino stuff. We've kind of already touched on that, so I'm not going to go over it again. Let's have a look at some of the questions that you guys are asking. Here we go. He says, how do we keep Nwaneri and Saka happy when Saka is fit? Both top players in the same position and may not be happy with being on the bench. Rice is a 6 with Nwaneri and Odegaard in front with Saka on the right. I don't know. I don't know that I'd run the risk of a midfield that is as lightweight as that. Obviously, Rice is a powerhouse, but I think in the biggest games against the very big opposition, the biggest games against the very best opposition, I think that midfield could be a little bit exposed. I think Rice and Partey as a combination is perfect because you've got a bit of everything in there, and that's why it works so well. I think Nwaneri is going to have to accept for the time being that when Bukayo Saka comes back, he's going to be in and out of the team. But he's 17 years old. There's no rush, is there, for him to be playing every single minute of every single game. And you run the risk of doing to him what I discussed earlier and what I believe has happened to Raheem Sterling and Wayne Rooney, where, they play too much football too young, and by the age of 30, their careers are on the decline. So I think Nwaneri seems to be switched on enough and seems to have a good, mature head on his shoulders. But I think he needs to understand that when Saka comes back, there is a hierarchy and he's going to be in and out of the team. That doesn't mean he's not going to play every game. He just might play 20 minutes, half an hour, and having that ability and that capacity to go, Bukayo Saka looks bloody knackered, get him off and bring Ethan Nwaneri on and believe that he is capable of giving you something. I think is a massive upgrade in terms of the position we'd be in when they're both available in comparison to where we are now and have been when we only had Bukayo Saka as a viable option on that right-hand side. I think he's killed off Raheem Sterling's use, Ethan Nwaneri, by being as good as he has. And so, let's see how it goes. It's a good problem to have, I guess, is what I would say on that. It's a good problem to have, isn't it? Okay. What have we got in the chat? William Holmes says, sorry, Harry, you can't compete across multiple fronts with poor squad depth. I never said you could. And I've complained as much as anybody about the lack of action to kind of make sure that the squad was well stocked enough for what remains of the season. I agree with you. You can't compete on multiple fronts with a poor squad. You've got a better chance of doing it when you have a bit more luck around injuries. And obviously that has not been the case for us this season. But yeah, you're right. I'm not even disagreeing with you. I'm not sure why you think that I'm sort of saying that the squad. All I've said is that this squad is going to fight. This squad is willing. This squad is capable. Maybe not of winning the title. We're only going to find that out at the end of the season. But what this squad does have is lots of fight, lots of desire, lots of adaptability. And at times I've certainly moaned about Mikel Arteta prioritizing versatility when going after players, because I think that what that can do is leave you short of bodies. Because if you're looking at one guy as the guy that's going to cover multiple positions, it can then leave you short. And that becomes a problem, right? When they go down injured. But I actually think the versatility bit and piece and looking at very specific skills that each individual has is going to help us now in this period of time. Ethan Nwaneri hasn't been recruited. Obviously, he's come through the academy, but we'd all have said that he was an Odegaard type, a 10, a right-sided 8 with a bit more license than your conventional right-sided 8. And now he's playing on the right wing and he's flourishing because we found a way of just adapting his role, but still extracting all of his qualities. Mikel Merino's qualities when we signed him, and I've not always been convinced, by the way, about the Mikel Merino signing, and I'm still not going to sit here and say it's been a resounding success, because right now it hasn't been. He scored a couple of goals at Leicester, great, really pleased with that, but he's still got a lot more to prove as far as I'm concerned. But when he was signed, you can bet that his ability to get into the box, the timing that Mikel Arteta talked about in the press conference yesterday of his runs, and that finishing ability that he's displayed, you can bet that that was a big part of why he was signed. And so although he wasn't directly signed to play as a centre forward, the fact that he has that and the fact that that was something that attracted us means that now we can use him as an auxiliary centre forward option in circumstances like this. So that's where versatility benefits you, if that makes sense. Okay, guys, I am going to leave it there. We've been going for nearly an hour and 20 minutes. That must be our longest podcast of the season. A massive thank you to every single one of you who has tuned in throughout the duration of the stream. If you're watching us on YouTube, guys, please, can we get to 200 likes by the time I hit the end stream button? We're not a million miles off it, and there's hundreds of you watching, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be there. Also, if you're watching us on X, come over to the Chronicles of a Gooner YouTube channel or subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. A massive thank you to every single one of you once again, and we'll be back very, very soon with some more Chronicles of a Gooner Arsenal content, which I can't wait to bring you. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a great Sunday, or what remains of your Sunday, or Monday, if you're listening to this on Monday. I'll catch you all then. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Goodbye.